Thanks for tuning in. I'm Han-dan in Seoul. North Korea has intensified its provocations this month by launching another round of its trash balloon campaign while firing several missiles, including a ballistic missile equipped with a large conventional warhead. This follows the secretive regime's unveiling of a uranium enrichment facility, which some experts say has the capacity to produce 5 nuclear weapons per year. Meanwhile, North Korea's two-state approach has sparked fresh debate here in the South regarding unification. To help us navigate through these latest developments and their implications, our weekly commentator, Dr. Go Myung-hyun, joins me in the studio. It's always a pleasure to have you with us.
Always so good to be back.
And joining us virtually is former U.S. Acting Assistant Secretary of State Evans Revere. He's also a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good to be with you again.
All right, Dr. Go, let's kick things off with you. The Joint Chiefs of Staff have warned of a possible military response should North Korea's trash balloons pose a direct threat to the safety of South Korean citizens. How do you assess Seoul's response so far, and what kind of military action could be under consideration?
Well, for now, I think the Joint Chiefs of Staff has assessed that the scale of North Korean trash balloon campaign is actually approaching a dangerous level. And we know that North Korea has frequently sent the balloons in the recent weeks. And then, contrary to our optimistic expectations, some of those balloons, in fact, carried dangerous materials. In this case, especially not really an explosive, but we're talking about small explosives that are used to time the balloons to explode in a certain location. So sometimes those devices fell to the ground and then started fire underground, and it actually caused property damages. So clearly the South Korean government is concerned that if the North Koreans keep up this pace of this provocations, this could potentially lead to loss of life, which is the red line for any government, including the South Korean one. So I think this is essentially a warning to North Koreans that their campaign is approaching that level. So that could constitute a red line. But at the same time, it's necessary for the Korean government to be ambiguous about the red line, because you don't want North Koreans to play with that red line. So if North Koreans are aware that certain lines, it's only after they cross a certain line that the South Korean government is going to take certain action. They'll try their best to stay just below that red line. So in order to avoid such scenarios, so the government is actually keeping that red line ambiguous and vague. But I think what we can gather from the Korean government's reaction is that essentially, their assessment is that the North Korean campaign has become too intense and also approaching dangerous level. And if North Koreans, by mistake or maybe by intention, cross that line, I think the South Korean government will have to resort to a more energetic response than that they have shown so far. So especially if the damage or actually causes a loss of life on the ground, then probably South Korean government will have to resort to a limited exercise of its firepower, essentially sending warning shots across the border or even attack the place of origin of the balloons launches. So I think before that happens, though, the South Korean government will have to communicate that very clearly to the North Korean side to ensure that if South Korean government takes action, that action is going to be limited and in scope, and also in terms of geographic scale. And that way it avoids a potential escalation that gets out of control.
I mean, it's just nonstop, right? More than 5,500 balloons in the past few months. That's just absurd. So perhaps it is about time for South Korea to raise its response level one notch. But of course, as you mentioned, within a rational level, so as not to provoke North Korea too much, and also keeping its red lines ambiguous. Now, Dr. Revere, a U.S. expert in nuclear nonproliferation, Jeffrey Lewis, said that a recently unveiled photo of North Korea's uranium enrichment facility suggests it can produce 95 kilograms of highly enriched uranium annually, meaning it can make 5 units of nuclear weapons a year. What are the implications of this?
Well, I'm convinced that Kim Jong-un's recent visit to a uranium enrichment facility and the release of photos of that visit to the public were aimed at convincing the international community that North Korea has the actual capacity to fulfill Kim Jong-un's repeatedly stated directive to increase his country's nuclear weapons capability exponentially, was the word that he has used. But I think it also tells us that North Korea wants Washington to know that the DPRK is not going to be deterred as it seeks to become a permanent nuclear power. The North Korean leader seems eager to send a message to the United States in advance of America's presidential election, and also a message to the next U.S. administration, regardless of who will lead that administration, that North Korea is and is going to remain a nuclear weapon state. So because of those signals, I think U.S. and Republic of Korea policy decisions going forward are going to have to be premised on the assumption that we're dealing with a regime that is determined to remain a nuclear power and remain a threat to us. The fact that the Pyongyang regime not only has the uranium enrichment facility shown in those recent photos, but also has another, probably more sophisticated facility, should also concern us very deeply. But all of this, getting to the core of your question, all of this underscores the danger that North Korea poses and the challenge that both our countries are going to face in dealing with Pyongyang's threat going forward.
Dr. Go, what is your analysis of the rare glimpse into the uranium enrichment facility, and also help us understand how Pyongyang was able to expand its enrichment program despite years of stifling sanctions?
So I think what the North Korea has shown essentially confirms the suspicions that we had for a very long time, that North Korea had yet another uranium enrichment facility besides the one that they had shown to Dr. Siegfried Hecker back in the 2000s, reputably located in Yongbyon. It seems that this is a separate facility, possibly located in Gangsan. That's what Jeffrey Lewis has pointed out. And what's interesting, though, is that we have seen evidence of North Korea procuring essentially a special type of a metal alloy from different countries around the world, some of them from Russia, and these are made of maleic steel, which is a very strong form of steel. But at the same time, that type of steel, in fact, the centrifuges made with that type of steel is actually a very, I would say, basic one. So if indeed North Korea have been procuring these emerging steel pipes, say from Russia, and in fact those steel pipes have been basis of the centrifuges that we have seen just now from the North Koreans, then means that the process, the speed of enrichment production is pretty much not on the upper bound expectation, probably sometimes some level lower than that, meaning that with the more basic form of centrifuges made of a more, I would say, like antiquated form of steel, it lowers our estimation of uranium production. So it means that either North Korea has more facilities like this, because in order to compensate for like a low rate of production, they have to have more production bases, or that North Koreans are producing not as much as they could, which means, though, that the North Korean could, in fact, asking the Russians to provide North Koreans with more advanced form of materials that could speed up the production of highly enriched uranium using the centrifuges, but with more sophisticated and lighter and stronger materials. So I think that this remains to be seen, but then overall, this is still in the realm of speculation. But given the massive scale of North Korea's uranium enrichment facilities, each chance is likely that the North Koreans are really, they're actually following their roadmap for massive production of nuclear weapons on time. So in that sense, it's overall a very threatening message coming from North Korea.
Meanwhile, Dr. Revere, North Korean Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee was largely expected to attend the UN General Assembly, but instead she headed to Russia for a Eurasian Women's Forum and the first BRICS Women's Forum. What do you make of this?
Well, I think faced with a choice between attending a United Nations General Assembly meeting where the DPRK would be, as it usually is, rather isolated and would be widely viewed as a pariah and a threat on the one hand, and a chance to further strengthen ties with Russia and pursue North Korea's interest in possible BRICS membership on the other, Pyongyang obviously opted for the latter. North Korea is very heavily invested in strengthening ties with Moscow, and I think this decision, this move, and this visit reflects that. I also think that as Russia's challenge in dealing with its war against Ukraine is reaching a new and a very dangerous stage, Moscow may have urged Pyongyang to dispatch its foreign minister to Moscow to coordinate the DPRK's continuing support for the war. Meanwhile, I think Pyongyang is very intrigued by Moscow's recently stated commitment to help the DPRK increase its participation in international organizations and dialogues. And I think towards that end, North Korea was probably, by this visit, eager to signal strong interest to Moscow about its willingness to become a more central player in Moscow's family of relationships.
And there has been a notable uptick in North Korea's interest in BRICS members as well, right, as it seeks to expand its diplomatic horizon within certain networks. And staying with you, Dr. Revere, Kim Jong-un's two-state approach and abandonment of unification goals sparked a fresh debate here in South Korea after the former presidential chief of staff, Im Jong-seok, said peaceful coexistence as two separate countries is not such a bad idea. President Yoon today was quick to respond, saying that abandoning unification goal is unconstitutional and will further raise security risks. Now, I want to ask you, what is Washington's take on Kim's two-state approach?
Well, I certainly can't speak for the United States government or provide the so-called Washington take, but I certainly can offer the assessment of someone who's been following these issues for several decades. North Korea, obviously, I think we all know, has definitively rejected its past pursuit of dialogue and reconciliation with the Republic of Korea. And instead of, as we know, Pyongyang is now pursuing a policy that focuses on hostility towards the Republic of Korea. And this policy includes the idea of the violent absorption of South Korea into a unified Korean state under North Korean rule. Many of us who work on North Korea have been saying for years that this is the real, and always has been the real, DPRK position on relations with the South. And my sense is that North Korea has now virtually admitted as much by following this new policy. This blunt new North Korean policy has very deeply embarrassed South Korean progressives for obvious reasons, because those progressives over the years have argued that the Republic of Korea should seek reconciliation and dialogue and peace with the DPRK. And over the years, these progressives have claimed that the Pyongyang regime wanted this as well. But the North Korean regime's new policy, I think, has destroyed this progressive argument. So now, in an effort, this is my take on things, in an effort to try to rescue what is left of their long-standing argument, some South Korean progressives have decided that the best way forward is to effectively accept the North Korean position that the two Koreas are separate from each other. So we find ourselves right now in the rather strange position of having a conservative government in Seoul arguing that the two Koreas are and must become one nation, while some on the progressive side in the Republic of Korea are arguing that the two countries are separate states. That latter view, of course, sounds very much like the North Korean position, which, of course, is designed to justify the DPRK's violent absorption of the South. So the progressives advocating this view have some serious explaining to do.
This really is quite an awkward situation indeed. Now, Dr. Ko, North Korea's provocations have intensified this month, including the launch of several missiles, one of which Pyongyang says is a new short-range ballistic missile equipped with a 4.5-ton conventional, ultra-large conventional warhead. Now, How do you assess the scale of Pyongyang's provocations in the lead up to U.S. presidential election?
Well, it's always been the case that North Korea starts its provocation cycle rather small, with like a small provocation that's oftentimes limited to the environs of the Korean Peninsula. Then actually they grow the provocation from there to something to go past something much larger and has a strategic significance, such as a test of an intercontinental ballistic missile or a nuclear test. So, because we have seen this pattern being repeated over and over in the past, this is actually forms the basis for the estimation or expectation that North Korea could carry out a major nuclear test on the eve of the U.S. presidential elections in November, which is actually coming very soon. So, so that forms the basis of expectation. But at the same time, I think the North Koreans are sending many different messages at the same, with a multi-layer way of manner. So, for instance, the recent test of the ballistic short-range ballistic missile that supposedly carries a super large warhead, this is actually a response to South Korea. So South Korea has announced that it's going to complete the development of such a missile, which can carry a very large conventional warhead, which I think weighs around 9 tons. And North Koreans are essentially telling the South Koreans that they can match South Korean capability on an equal basis. It's not a message to the United States, but rather to South Korea. And also, there's a recent revelation that North Korea had, it was Kim Yo-jong herself who said North Korea detected the arrival of the U.S. nuclear submarine Vermont in Busan, and they even announced that they knew the exact time to the second of the submarine's arrival. So, which implies that North Koreans have strategic surveillance and reconnaissance capability, which can only come from space. So, it's in fact, North Koreans are trying to refer to the fact that North Koreans have been putting on the orbit a spy satellite, even though we suspect that those spy satellites made by North Koreans are low-tech, meaning they have surveillance sensors of a low resolution. Nonetheless, North Koreans are claiming that they have a much better capability now. So this is a strategic capability. So if North Koreans want to complete this picture, they're insinuating a picture to the international community that they have a very capable strategic capability now. It's a nuclear state with a surveillance and reconnaissance capability, remote sensors, and essentially a portfolio of missile capabilities that ranges from short range to intercontinental range. So if they want to complete this picture, the missing puzzle here will be a nuclear test. This is the reason why there's a growing expectation that North Koreans are going to carry out, finally, the much anticipated nuclear test, probably time for the U.S. presidential elections.
Dr. Revere, National Security Advisor Shin Won-sik has hinted that a South Korea, U.S., Japan trilateral summit could be held within this year. Do you think this will materialize? And if so, when is the most likely timing? I know you don't have the crystal ball, but...
Well, it's pretty obvious that the United States, the Republic of Korea, and Japan are clearly on track to hold a leadership summit, which, among other things, would mark the establishment of a secretariat that would further institutionalize and formalize their trilateral cooperation. I think at the same time, with the United States and Japan on the verge of leadership transitions after elections, I believe the three countries also are very keen to reaffirm their shared commitment to maintaining a very strong, cooperative, and vigorous framework that they've established, and they also want to demonstrate in a very public way that this partnership is going to continue. So I fully expect that there's going to be a trilateral summit in the coming weeks. The timing is obviously largely a matter of logistics and coordinating schedules, although I think that having the new Japanese Prime Minister at the meeting would reinforce the message of continuity in a very interesting way. So I don't expect the meeting is going to happen on the next day or so, but I do expect perhaps shortly after a new prime minister is inaugurated in Tokyo that the three countries may go forward with this very important and very symbolic, but also practically important trilateral meeting.
But Dr. Go, the U.S. appears less engaged with North Korea issues than before as the two ongoing wars loom large. President Biden made no mention of North Korea in his final speech to the UN General Assembly as president. What do you make of this?
Well, clearly the situation in the Korean Peninsula is relatively stable compared to other hotspots in the world. So I think this is obviously the reason why it's not really taking about much attention from the White House when it comes to the North Korean issue. And then also it's in part North Koreans to be blamed for this because North Koreans, they don't want to engage in dialogue with the international community regarding the situation in the Korean Peninsula. They've been very much focused on strengthening their relationship with Russia. So there's partly the reason, and also I think it also has to do with the fact that President Biden is on his way out. So he's not going to seek re-election, and then this speech at the United Nations General Assembly was a valedictorian speech for an outgoing president. So I think he wants to, even though he's been talking about the current affairs and challenges that the United States is facing right now, he also wanted to imbue the speech with some sense of legacy. And you cannot really base your legacy on an issue that is not really going anywhere. So I think this was a reason why President Biden chose not to mention North Korea in his speech. But it doesn't mean that this reflects the position of the U.S. government regarding North Korea. We know, as I mentioned earlier, the militaries of the two countries are still very much engaged in exercises and mutual visits, and as well as preparing together the readiness in case North Korea miscalculates and launches a major provocation. Also the example of that is the recent visit by the USS Vermont, a nuclear submarine. So the work is going on. There's a system behind it. So I think in that sense, I think we shouldn't be worried about the fact that President Biden didn't mention North Korea in his probably a major final speech, I would say.
All right, we'll leave our discussion there. Thank you, as always, Dr. Ko, for your perspectives.
My pleasure.
And thank you, Dr. Revere, for your valuable insights.
Good to be with you again.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.